Hey there. You're listening to True Story No Cap. Real stories, no exaggeration, no lies. Just the raw, unfiltered moments life throws our way. Relax, lean back, and let's get started. David stepped out of the entrance, shivering from the cold. November reigned around, enveloping everything in impenetrable gloom, although it was still early, only 8 in the evening. A biting gust of wind whistled through the tree crowns, and a drizzling autumn slush poured from the sky. Faster, faster, he needed to cross the yard. His faithful Swallow awaited him by the 12th entrance, an old but reliable Daewoo Nexia, their family breadwinner. How uncomfortable it was at such a time. About such weather, people usually say that even a good owner wouldn't drive a dog out. Well, for David, this was even beneficial. More orders, and therefore a chance to earn well this evening. During the day, he worked as an economist at a bank. By the standards of their town, the pay there was quite decent. Yet, the man had to go out for a second shift almost daily, driving a taxi because the family was desperately short of money. The funds weren't needed for buying a new car, a spacious apartment, or a vacation at a trendy resort, although that wouldn't hurt either. The money went towards Sam's treatment and rehabilitation. Sam, their elder son, was for the man both a pain and the greatest joy. How they and his wife rejoiced when their first child came into the world. David still remembered Sarah's eyes at the maternity ward doors. With what pride she handed her anxious husband a pile of diapers and a tiny bundle. David carefully lifted the corner of the blanket and saw his son's face for the first time. The baby slept, eyes squeezed shut and eyebrows furrowed in annoyance. David felt as if a warm wave had washed over him. He couldn't believe his happiness. Could this tiny creature, this little human being, really be his child? At first, Sam seemed absolutely healthy, developing perfectly, as if by the book. He started tracking objects on time, turned over, sat up at the proper age, and even walked earlier. He hadn't even turned one yet. David and Sarah rejoiced at their son's successes, proud of their bright boy. David was a very involved father. Returning from work, he immediately rushed to his son, played with him, bathed him, fed him dinner, giving his wife a chance to rest. The man did this not out of obligation. He sincerely enjoyed spending time with the boy, especially since Sammy was simply an exemplary child. He grasped everything on the fly, never threw tantrums over nothing. Even at his young age, things could be explained to him with words, almost like an adult. Of course, Sarah and David often made plans for their son's future. "He's so smart," the happy mother smiled, watching her baby build a tall tower out of building blocks. "This toy is designed for children 3 years and older, and Sammy is just over a year old, but he's already figured out what's what. He'll probably grow up to be a talented engineer or architect." David agreed. He also felt that Sam was ahead of his peers in development. He saw this as his wife's merit. She wasn't lazy, spending whole days doing developmental games with their son, reading him fairy tales, introducing the baby to the world around him. "I wish he'd start school sooner," Sarah dreamed. "They'll probably praise me at parent-teacher meetings." "And me," David smiled. "I'll go to school sometimes too. We'll take turns. Otherwise it's not fair. All the glory to you alone." When Sam turned 1, the couple learned about a new pregnancy. It was a complete surprise. They hadn't planned on making Sam an older brother so quickly. Their son was still a baby, requiring no small amount of attention and care. And here, a new child was on the way. At first, the couple were a little scared, but then they calmed down and even rejoiced. "It's for the best," Sarah assured him. "The age difference between the children will be small. They'll have common interests and all that. They'll have fun together." "Yes, that's certainly a plus," David agreed. "But how will you handle it?" "I'm at work until late evening, and you won't have anyone to help you, alone with 2 little ones like that." "I'm not the first. I won't be the last," Sarah bravely said, stroking her still unnoticeable belly. "Others manage, so we will too." The pregnancy went well. True, in the first week, Sarah suffered from terrible morning sickness, which hadn't happened during her pregnancy with Sam. "Probably a girl," the pale woman smiled. "It would be great to have a complete set. Well, a boy is good too. It's more interesting and fun for boys to grow up together." David didn't care if their youngest was a boy or a girl. Other things worried him, his wife's and the baby's health. Sarah was very tired. Sam had grown a bit and turned into an incredibly active young explorer. He needed constant supervision. At a routine ultrasound, it turned out that Sarah was indeed expecting a girl, and not just one. The ultrasound technician confidently stated that the couple needed to prepare for twins. It was probably a shock. David almost clutched his head, only restraining himself because of Sarah. She lay on the couch, so happy, smiling at the monitor. The doctor showed her the daughters actively kicking their arms and legs. "Remember how we dreamed of a big family?" Sarah asked on the way home. Of course, David remembered. He met his future wife at the university at one of the festive events. There was a concert for students, followed by a disco in the large assembly hall. That's where David noticed the pretty, shy Sarah. Her friends were having a blast on the dance floor, while she stood by a pillar, smiling and watching the vibrant scene. David first admired her from afar. This gentle, modest girl captivated him somehow. Perhaps it was her naturalness, meekness, calmness, and also, she had an incredibly kind, warm smile. When David first saw it light up the sweet face of the girl he didn't yet know, he immediately understood that he was in love. Just like that, at first sight. Of course, David approached the beautiful stranger, found out her name, and struck up a conversation. Now the man couldn't even remember what they talked about. It seemed to be trivial questions. Where do you study? What do you do? And so on. And then fate itself gave the interested young man a chance. A smooth, calm melody started playing. A slow dance. Of course, David invited Sarah. On perfectly legitimate grounds, he got the opportunity to put his arm around her waist, to touch her. It seemed that during this dance he realized that he would never, ever let go of this charming creature. He wanted to protect Sarah, make her happy, cheer her up, to feel her gratitude and see that smile, so beautiful, gentle, kind. They started dating. With each passing day, David became more convinced that Sarah was his other half. They understood each other with half a word, saw many things the same way, and even chose the same movies. In short, no one was surprised when a few years later, right after graduating from university, David and Sarah got married. Both came from average families, not impoverished, but not rich either. An apartment didn't fall into their laps from the sky, but the couple, who had already found their first jobs, were able to get a mortgage. Their family nest became a small 2-room apartment in a cozy residential area. David thought at the time that this was just the beginning. He planned to climb the career ladder, maybe even become a department head. Why not? He was a hard worker, not afraid of responsibility, and then they could move to a bigger apartment. But now this 2-room apartment would do. Sarah acted as the interior designer back then. With what enthusiasm she chose wallpaper, tiles, chandeliers, curtains. Of course, she had to work within a very limited budget, but Sarah managed. After the renovation, the apartment was completely transformed. It now resembled a stylish dwelling from some glossy magazine. How did you do it? David wondered then. He hadn't expected such a result at all. Natural talent, Sarah smirked. It was true. Then Sam came along. And now, the news of twin pregnancy, David thought for the first time that he wasn't coping. After all, their family was just 5 minutes away from being a large family. And David? He still wasn't a department head. His salary was, of course, higher now, and the position more respectable than at the very beginning of his career path. But dreaming of a new apartment or a new car was out of the question. David then seriously began to think about options for starting his own business. He couldn't even imagine yet that soon they would really need money. A lot of money. And not at all for improving their living conditions. Much more urgent needs would arise. When Sarah was in the final months of her pregnancy, Sam suddenly fell ill. The baby developed a high fever and a severe cough. This was the first time it had happened in the baby's 1.5 years of life. Before that, he hadn't even had a runny nose. Of course, the young parents were very worried. David even took sick leave from work to be with his wife and son, because Sarah's belly had reached some incredible size, and it was difficult for her to even move around the house. And Sam? He wanted to be held so much. The baby was very ill. David rocked him in his strong arms for days. Then the illness retreated, the fever subsided, the cough disappeared. Sarah and David breathed a sigh of relief, but Sam changed a lot after the illness. He became completely different. The young parents didn't recognize him. The previously cheerful, curious baby suddenly turned into an apathetic, indifferent child. If before he would curiously climb everywhere he could and couldn't, which of course caused his parents a lot of problems, now he just sat in a corner and lined up things that came to hand. toys, dishes, shoes, books. Silently, methodically, staring somewhere into space. It seemed that Sam had stopped understanding speech addressed to him. The baby hadn't spoken before the illness either, just babbled something in his baby language. But he understood everything, absolutely everything. He brought toys when asked by his parents, chose food and clothes, participated in games. Now, however, their son seemed to have walled himself off from the world and retreated into his own world. And when the bewildered parents tried to pull him out, Sam threw tantrums with screaming, crying, and rolling on the floor. At these moments, he was impossible to stop. The nightmare only ended when the baby's strength gave out. He would fall asleep right on the floor or lie silently, staring into the void before him. It was terrifying. The unknown was frightening. Of course, the anxious parents took the child to doctors. They just shrugged, asked them to be patient, prescribed vitamins, explained the condition as consequences of a severe illness, and assured them that the body would recover and everything would be as before. David and Sarah hoped, they wanted to believe the doctor's prognoses, but both already suspected that they were facing a problem, a serious problem. True, they tried not to share their fears aloud. And then the girls were born, Annie and Lara. As is often the case with twins, the babies were born a little prematurely. They were very small and weak. The girls spent the first month of their lives in the hospital. They were in special incubators fed with some special formulas. David saw his daughters in the hospital. Annie and Lara lay, tangled in tubes, tiny, thin. They were very different from their older brother, who had always been big, chubby-cheeked, and bursting with health. The man's heart ached at the sight of the girls. Weak, almost transparent, touching. Would they pull through? They pulled through. Annie and Lara were discharged from the hospital with good weight and wonderful prognoses. Life with newborn twins and a 1.5-year-old son with unexplained problems, that was something. Sarah and David temporarily forgot what sleep was, sleeping in snatches, taking turns. David still didn't understand how they endured it all. The girls grew, developed at the right pace, delighted their parents with their intelligence, gave them smiles, joyful emotions. But Sam, he drifted further and further into his incomprehensible world. The boy hardly reacted to what was happening around him. Despite their busyness, the parents managed to take Sam to doctors. At first, they found no abnormalities. What do you expect? The pediatrician shrugged. First a severe illness, then 2 younger sisters for the little one appeared right after. Of course your boy is in shock. Give him time to recover, he'll be fine. But time passed, and things only got worse. Tantrums out of nowhere, restless sleep, repetitive, constantly repeated actions. But most frightening was Sammy's detachment. He no longer smiled at his mom and dad, no longer sought their attention. The boy paid no attention to his little sisters at all, as if they didn't exist. Sam's peers were already starting to talk, and in the yard, they tried to play with each other. Sometimes this led to quarrels and misunderstandings, but the children communicated they were interested in being together, they were drawn to each other. But Sam? Sam at that very time would sit somewhere in the corner of the sandbox and methodically pour sand from one bucket to another, for hours. Sarah and David would have preferred, like other parents, to run around the yard with their son and make sure he didn't fall from somewhere or climb where he shouldn't, but that wasn't the case. Sam didn't go to kindergarten at the appointed time. Sarah didn't send him. He's not ready for kindergarten, she shook her head. Maybe, on the contrary, kindergarten would be good for him. David doubted. He'll start interacting with other children, learn something. Sarah just shook her head sadly. She knew her son better than anyone else. Her eyes, they were so sad at that moment. David was ready to do anything in the world just not to see that bitterness, that fear in his beloved's eyes. The anxious father managed to get an appointment with a professor, an experienced specialist who was difficult to book. It was he who delivered the terrible diagnosis that nipped all hopes and dreams associated with Sam in the bud. Autism, and a very severe degree at that. Yes, at first the development of such children proceeds at a normal pace, and then there's a regression. It always happens. Sometimes the trigger is a vaccination, sometimes, as in Sam's case, an illness. Sometimes it just happens on its own. You will have to accept this fact. The professor looked at the frightened parents sternly, speaking sharply. Life hasn't ended. It will just be a completely different life. The boy requires treatment, rehabilitation. Results? It's complicated. Some such patients compensate quite successfully, others, but anything can happen. In any case, your son now needs lifelong treatment. Treatment and your support. For the young couple, their whole world collapsed then. They remembered their plans and dreams related to Sam and couldn't help but cry. Even David cried, though secretly from Sarah. Of course, in front of her, he put on a brave face, trying to appear calm and fearless. The diagnosis was not easy to accept, but at least it became clear which direction to move in. Endless trips to hospitals, development centers, rehabilitation clinics began. Sam was accepted into a correctional kindergarten where specialists worked intensively with him. True, they had to take him across town every day, but the couple seemed to start noticing results. By the age of 5, Sam finally started talking. It wasn't conscious dialogue, but repeatedly spoken phrases from cartoons and commercials. But the parents were happy even with that. Annie and Lara also grew. They were simply wonderful girls, not geniuses or prodigies, but normal, happy children, cheerful, artistic, loving their parents. The daughters were friends with the neighborhood kids, adored animals, and played with dolls. It was important to them what they wore and how they looked. The girls often hugged their mom and dad, gave them smiles, and were happy to go for walks with them. And these ordinary things in general were perceived by Sarah and David as the highest happiness. Of course, Sarah didn't return to work after maternity leave. Sam needed a lot of time. The woman worked with him at home herself and constantly took him to hospitals and clinics. And the girls needed attention too. So, for now, there was no talk of Sarah working. David became the sole breadwinner for the family. The bank paid well, but a lot of money was needed for treatment and rehabilitation. A lot. Sometimes the family was financially supported by relatives, foundations Sarah applied to, but most of the expenses, of course, fell on their own shoulders. David hustled as best he could, sometimes helping with paid repairs, sometimes driving a taxi like this evening. David finally reached his car and slid into the warm interior. Tiredness. Right now, he felt only heavy tiredness and despair. The man understood that even if he drove a taxi all night, he still wouldn't earn the necessary amount. Sarah had learned about a new method at a local private center. An enthusiastic doctor was organizing a rehabilitation course for children like Sam. He promised impressive results, but this pleasure was not cheap. There was very little time left to raise the necessary sum. Sarah had been hinting to David lately that he wasn't fulfilling his main duty, couldn't provide for the family properly. Not accusing him directly, no. But she sighed, stated the necessary sums for treatment, and looked at him with silent reproach. It was unbearable. David felt completely worthless at such moments. Yes, he really couldn't provide for his own wife and 3 children. They had been living in the same 2-room apartment for almost 10 years, had never flown to the sea, and drove an old Daewoo Nexia that David had inherited from his father. It had already started to rust. But the most important thing was that David couldn't pay for the treatment his son so desperately needed. Sam's return to a normal life, that cost a lot. And David didn't know how to earn that kind of money. That was a fact. It was hard to constantly feel the burden of guilt for his own child's condition on his shoulders. It was simply impossible to get used to this feeling. And on top of that, the man couldn't give enough attention to his daughters either. He was always either at work or doing odd jobs. Annie and Lara adored him, clinging to their father's neck as soon as he crossed the threshold. It was so touching, so sweet, that David's heart ached with tenderness for these little ones. It was just a shame they didn't spend time together often. Sarah was very tired. Over the years since Sammy's illness began, she had turned into a thin, embittered woman with a hard gaze. Sarah nagged her husband about every little thing, often vented her fear and irritation on him, demanded, scolded, sometimes even insulted him. David understood why his wife behaved this way and didn't condemn her. On the contrary, he felt very sorry for Sarah. He remembered her as that meek, gentle, kind girl he had first seen in the assembly hall. She was like that sometimes. That old Sarah would surface, and then David felt almost happy. True, lately, it happened less and less often. David sighed, started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness of the yard. The man pressed the accelerator pedal to the floor and set off to look for passengers. There should be plenty on such a foul evening. Who wanted to get soaked in the rain waiting for a bus? David even enjoyed driving a taxi a little. Sometimes he met interesting clients. Many of them confided their deepest secrets to the driver. Over the years, David had listened to many incredible stories. Perhaps someday later, when he had free time, he would even write a book. The evening went on. David drove a few people who had stayed late at work home, delivered a package, took a clearly upset man to the train station. Several hours flew by unnoticed. Night fell, black, uncomfortable, impenetrable, as if on purpose there were no more orders. David didn't like such forced downtime. He was losing time and not earning money. It was frustrating. The man decided to drive around the city himself. Maybe he'd find clients. That often happened, but the streets were emptier than ever. It was shaping up to be a bad shift, and this was at the very time when money for urgent rehabilitation was so needed. Sarah would sigh heavily again over the earnings David brought her, and even worse if she started crying. David couldn't stand his wife's tears. The sight of a crying Sarah made him scared, truly scared. David drove out of the city onto the bypass road. It was faster to get to the center that way. He needed to look there. Surely someone would need a taxi in this weather. And the center was, after all, the busiest part of the city. There were few cars on the road. The rain was pouring down. David had to turn the wipers to the highest speed. The man glanced at his phone screen. Almost 2:00. A little more, and it would be time to go back. He had to get up at 7 in the morning. He needed some sleep, otherwise he'd mix up the numbers in his report again, and they might even take away his bonus as punishment. He couldn't let that happen. Absolutely not. Suddenly, the headlights caught a human figure hurrying along the roadside. David slowed down, peering closely. Strange. Who would think of walking along the side of the highway in this weather, and at night? An inner voice, wise and practical, advised David to drive past, because, well, it was clear that something was fishy, and David had enough problems of his own. He needed to earn money. He needed to look for orders, not get involved in dubious adventures. Home, Sarah. She was waiting for money. David had many obligations to his family. What could be simpler than just driving past and forgetting about the person hurrying somewhere along the slippery, muddy roadside? But the man already knew he had stopped. This person clearly needed help. There were almost no cars on the highway at this time. Maybe he was the stranger's last chance for salvation. David sighed and made the only right decision. Pulling alongside the person, the man braked. David was very surprised to realize that it was a girl standing by the roadside, very young, almost a child. She probably wasn't even 20. The stranger was wearing a wide coat clearly too big for her, and a man's at that. She was soaked through and most likely frozen. But what was this? The coat was pulled tight over the girl's bulging belly. She was clearly pregnant, and by all appearances she was far along. The scene became increasingly strange. The stranger looked at David with eyes full of hope and despair. Her entire face was wet, either from the rain or from tears. Most likely, from both at once. The man silently opened the passenger door. The girl slid into the car, and a dirty puddle immediately formed on the floor from her. "Please, let's go," the passenger pleaded. "Faster, or he'll catch me." Who? David thought for a moment again. This poor soul was being pursued by someone? Perhaps David was putting himself in great danger by agreeing to give her a ride, getting involved in problems. But what was his alternative? Kick the girl out? Leave her in the pouring rain on the roadside? No, the man couldn't do that. So if she said they needed to go faster, they needed to go faster. David pressed the gas pedal to the floor, and the car obediently shot forward. The man wasn't thinking about where to go, not yet. He just sped along the almost empty highway. The girl kept looking back. Once in the warmth and relative safety, she relaxed slightly, giving way to her feelings. Large tears streamed down her cheeks, sobs tore from her chest. But the passenger held them back with all her might, not letting hysteria completely take over. David looked at the girl with pity. So young and pregnant. What had happened to her? How could he help her? "Where to?" David finally asked. 10 minutes had passed, and they had covered a decent distance. "To the police?" "No." The girl fiercely shook her head. "Not there." David's doubts intensified. Why was she so scared of the police? Maybe she had done something wrong? Was this strange stranger being chased? Was she afraid to go to the police station? It was somehow suspicious. What had he gotten himself into? As if he didn't have enough problems of his own. The girl seemed to read his thoughts. "Don't think I'm a criminal, nothing like that. It's just that he has connections there, you understand? And when I ran away when he realized it, he must have reported me, said I took something or did something else. In short, if you take me to the police, they'll either detain me or, even worse, hand me over to him. Do you understand? I don't understand anything, David sighed. Of course you don't, the girl nodded. You don't know anything. I know that people shouldn't be on the highway in this weather. It's cold and raining, especially very young girls, and in your condition. The strange passenger, as if remembering she was pregnant, gently stroked her belly. That's why I ran away. Or rather, because of her. I'm having a girl. When I think that she could also fall into his hands, into the hands of that terrible man. Who is this terrible man you keep talking about? David finally decided to find out the truth. After all, he needed to decide where to take this young creature, and it was time to go home. He had to get up early tomorrow. He's my husband. Well, almost. We never got married, we were just planning to. Now I'm very glad we didn't get married. And why is he chasing you? Why did you run away from him? What happened? At that moment, the girl, looking back, noticed the headlights of a car catching up to them and immediately tensed up, shrinking back. Then she slid down completely so she couldn't be seen from the window. The car sped past. The girl exhaled and returned to her seat. Remarkable agility and speed for a future mother whose pregnancy was clearly nearing its end. Not him, the girl smiled. Lucky. So where should I take you? The man asked the main question. I need to think, the girl said, and then unexpectedly introduced herself. By the way, my name is Chloe. David, the man automatically replied. Nice to meet you, the girl smiled. David chuckled. Under such strange and anxious circumstances, their conversation suddenly took on the tone of polite small talk out of nowhere. I'll tell you what happened to me. Just please don't stop. Keep driving around the city. I'll pay for the gas and the time. Or rather, my father will pay. Please believe me. David shrugged. Driving was fine. It wasn't difficult for him. It's just that I'm afraid he might have tracked us down after all. If you stop, then... Well, you never know. Okay, the man nodded. I'm listening very carefully. Tell me everything. Just be honest. And then perhaps we'll figure out how to help you. Okay. Chloe took a deep breath and began her long story. Chloe was born in Zelenogorsk, the central city of their region. Her father was a successful businessman, and her mother didn't work, as her husband fully supported the family. Chloe lived in a large house with a swimming pool and a beautiful garden. From a young age, the girl never knew deprivation. Of course, the only child of wealthy parents. Expensive toys, trips to the most beautiful resorts in the world, lessons with the best coaches in the city, designer clothes, an elite private school. Chloe always had the best of everything. Her father simply adored his only daughter. Not only that, she was also the only grandchild for 2 sets of grandparents. Needless to say, Chloe was bathed in the love and attention of her relatives from birth. Until she was 10 or 12, the girl thought everyone lived like that. And then she looked around and realized a completely different life was happening in parallel. It was more complicated, more dangerous, but perhaps at the same time more interesting. In her last year of elite school, the girl was clearly bored. It seemed to her that all the most interesting, vibrant things were passing her by. She hadn't even been anywhere alone. After school, Chloe was picked up by a security guard, who also drove her to sections and clubs and even accompanied the owner's daughter when she went to the shopping center. No, there was no real danger threatening the girl. Her father conducted his business honestly. He received no threats. The man had no enemies. The security guard? He was there, but simply to prevent some guy from bothering Chloe on the street, for example, or to make sure she wasn't hit by a car. More of a nanny or escort. In short, her parents felt more at ease when a specially trained person was with their daughter. Most of Chloe's classmates were in the exact same situation. Graduating students were still accompanied by security guards, nannies, governesses, and so on. Classmates. They also seemed somehow boring, uninteresting to Chloe, the same hothouse plants as herself, grown under a bell jar. The boys and girls never even gathered alone without adults to do something wild and fun. Her father, when he met with old friends, sometimes recalled his childhood. Chloe listened to these conversations, not missing a word. Now, that was life. Freedom, adventure, danger. And what about her? Chloe knew that after graduating from school, she would go to study in Moscow. A place was already prepared for her at Moscow State University in the prestigious Faculty of Finance and Economics. Her father had taken care of it in advance. It was planned that Chloe would not live in a dormitory. A large, stylish, comfortable apartment near the university buildings had been rented for her beforehand. And of course, a housekeeper and a security guard would always be with the Golden Girl. Everything as usual. A fun student life did not await Chloe. Her father did not intend to loosen his control over his only beloved daughter, even from a distance. True, of course, as Chloe got older, she gained more rights, but it was still a negligible amount. Her parents continued to consider their almost adult daughter a small, naive girl surrounded by dangers everywhere. Chloe tried to talk to her parents to explain that she needed more freedom, but always met with complete lack of understanding. "But you are free," her mother shrugged. "You choose what to do yourself. You dropped the extra math classes, chose the racetrack. No one said a word. You want to go to Italy for the holidays? You go. You want to go to Thailand? You fly. What other freedom could there be?" "What you're asking for isn't freedom," her father echoed his wife. "It's called something else, neglect and abandonment. Do you know how many such unwanted children I saw in my childhood who wandered the streets all day? And not just saw, I was one of them myself. I was very lucky. I made it. But many didn't. Do you know how many broken lives I've seen? You have a happy life, a carefree childhood. Don't invent nonsense." Chloe realized she couldn't get through to her parents. For a while, the girl tried to protest, but only achieved being taken to an expensive psychologist. These sessions were unpleasant for Chloe because they spoke to her there in a deliberately soft and polite tone, and this woman in a strict blouse acted as if she were sitting not before a young girl dreaming of freedom, but a mad woman. Chloe finished school. It was her last summer before moving to Moscow. The capital awaited her. Something new. The girl hoped she would manage to gain more freedom despite the constant presence of her father's observers. After all, he had not only hired a housekeeper, almost a nanny, and a driver security guard for her, but had also alerted all their relatives and friends living in the capital. They were also supposed to keep an eye on Chloe. It was a sunny June day. Chloe wandered through the shopping center in the gloomiest mood. She needed to buy a swimsuit for her upcoming trip to a European resort. Or rather, she had many swimsuits. She just needed some excuse to leave the house. The calmness, the boredom had become unbearable. Her classmates had gone their separate ways. There was no one even to invite over. So Chloe invented entertainment for herself. A gray, dreary, monotonous life. Well fed, of course, but how boring. Chloe lacked adventure, bright emotions, something new and exciting. At least the security guard stayed in the car in the parking lot. Chloe pleaded with him not to go with her. He first called his boss, Chloe's father, and only then nodded briefly, letting the girl embark on her independent journey through the shopping center. Well, at least thank you for that. Chloe decided to go to the food court. She was hungry, and she just wanted some junk food. At home, the same cook prepared only proper meals, tasty, healthy, but already tiresome. So Chloe ordered a couple of hamburgers and soda. As the girl made her way to her table, she tripped over something. Later, she realized it was a toy car left by some child, a small military green truck. Fate, probably. Chloe lost her balance. Falling, she, of course, dropped the tray. As if in slow motion, the girl watched as the brown liquid spilled from the glass and, by the law of perversity, flew right at her. A second later, the girl was hit by several unpleasant sensations at once, the pain of hitting the floor and the cold from her soda. For a moment, Chloe just sat on the floor, assessing the size of the disaster. She was soaked almost through. Her light summer dress from the new collection was hopelessly ruined. The hamburgers. There they were, in pieces, lying around. By the way, the sauce from one of them was smeared on the hem of the same ill-fated dress. How could she go to the parking lot looking like this? Everyone would stare at her. Tears welled up in her eyes. Perhaps they were tears of anger and frustration. And then Chloe felt strong, reliable hands supporting her from behind. Someone helped her up. The girl turned around and met the eyes of her rescuer. It turned out to be a young guy. Not just a guy, a real hunk. Not like her skinny, pimply classmates. Tall, strong, masculine. Under the tight dark t-shirt, sculpted muscles were visible. An athlete, maybe? An open, simple face, regular features, a white-toothed smile, hair the pleasant shade of ripe wheat, and his eyes, incredible, piercing blue eyes on a beautiful tanned face. "Are you hurt?" the guy asked, looking Chloe up and down. The girl was a little embarrassed, which hadn't happened to her in a long time, or maybe ever. "No, just—" Chloe spread her hands in confusion, showing her rescuer what her dress had turned into. The wet clothes clung tightly to her figure, which the guy looked at with considerable interest. Admiration was clearly visible in his eyes. Chloe had never experienced such pleasant sensations before. A chill in her stomach, goosebumps on her back, slight dizziness. "Yeah, your dress will clearly have to be thrown away. Too bad. It really suits you." "I don't care about it," Chloe smiled. "But how do I get to the car looking like this?" "Very simply," the guy smiled, pulled off his t-shirt over his head and handed it to the girl. "Here, put it on. Nothing will be noticeable." And you?" Chloe asked in surprise, admiring the stranger's tanned, muscular torso. How perfect he was. Just— "What about me?" he smirked. "Let them look, whoever wants to. I'm a person without prejudices or complexes anyway." "Thank you." The girl smiled and put on the t-shirt. It smelled faintly of men's cologne. Through this scent, another barely perceptible smell broke through. His smell. It made Chloe feel slightly dizzy. She immediately wanted to wear this t-shirt forever. "I'll walk you out?" the guy asked. "Of course," Chloe hastily agreed. How good it was that he brought it up himself. Now she wouldn't have to invent an excuse to prolong this pleasant meeting. And they walked through the shopping center together. The stranger introduced himself as Jake. Chloe also gave her name. They walked and talked about some abstract topics, discussed the weather, car brands. They talked so easily and naturally, as if Jake and Chloe had known each other for many years. The girl didn't miss the way the guy looked at her. She had clearly caught his attention. Jake didn't hide it. "I really liked you," the guy said when they finally reached the exit. "You're an amazingly beautiful and smart girl. Maybe you'll give me your phone number? I'll call sometime. Maybe we can meet again." "Of course." Chloe was delighted. This handsome guy was going to ask her out. What could be more wonderful? A whole adventure was brewing. After all, Jake. He was so real, she definitely wouldn't be bored with him, but she would have to constantly find ways to meet him without the vigilant eye of the security guard. Well, it was okay. Chloe would figure something out. They would figure something out together. Chloe dictated her number to Jake, and he immediately called it, and his number appeared on Chloe's phone. "Wow, what a phone you've got," Jake exclaimed, seeing Chloe's phone. She was a little embarrassed. She knew perfectly well that Jake was far from as rich as she was. The girl didn't want this fact to affect their relationship in any way. I'll wait for your call," the girl stammered. "Jake?" He suddenly took a step towards her. Then, after a moment's thought, he gently put his arms around her shoulders and kissed her, right there in the shopping center, right in the middle of the crowd of people rushing about their business. For Chloe, it was her first real kiss. No, she had kissed a classmate once, but that kiss was more friendly. They just decided to try what it was like. Chloe didn't like it, wet, slobbery, unpleasant. But now, in this magical moment, she was truly happy. It seemed to her that she and Jake had become one. The guy held her tightly. She felt his strength and reliability. Her legs felt weak, her head was spinning. Huge butterflies fluttered in her stomach, beating their wings. "Sorry, I couldn't help myself," Jake smiled. "It's just that you're so beautiful." I liked it," Chloe admitted honestly. Jake beamed. He was clearly pleased to hear that. That day, Chloe couldn't sleep. Jake sent her several messages, calling her an unreal beauty and the most wonderful girl on earth. In the evening before bed, the guy called Chloe to wish her good night. The girl also wrote to him, mostly just replying to his messages. Chloe would have liked to call Jake, hear his voice, and reassure herself of his interest, but she was very afraid of being pushy. They started meeting secretly. Of course, for this, Chloe had to sign up for yoga classes. The security guard drove the girl to the fitness center building, but Chloe didn't go into the gym. Instead, she ran straight around to the staircase. There was a back exit to the courtyard. Chloe slipped out the door and immediately fell into Jake's warm, strong embrace. How good it was for them to be together. Jake made Chloe happy just by being there. She couldn't take her eyes off his bright blue eyes. And his smile. How the girl loved his white-toothed smile, which caused dimples on the guy's cheeks. They walked around the city or sat on a bench in the park somewhere and talked. Sometimes they went to the movies. And then, when it got colder, Jake started coming to Chloe's place in his car. It was a very old car that occasionally broke down and stopped right in the middle of the road. Jake would curse the rusty tin can, get out of the car, open the hood, and start fixing something there, rolling up his sweater sleeves. His strong, skilled tanned hands knew their job. The engine always started working. It turned out that nothing was impossible for Jake, and this made Chloe respect the young man even more. Of course, soon Chloe and Jake knew everything about each other. The girl told him about her life, well-fed, prosperous, but very boring. Jake just shook his head listening to Chloe's stories about her travels, house, and parents. "Yeah, you really are a princess," he remarked when he first learned about Chloe's family. "I probably won't be able to provide you with such—" "Nonsense," Chloe interrupted him. The last thing she needed was for him to feel awkward around her. "You're the best person I've ever known, but surely there are guys from families like yours hanging around you. They're spoiled, boring boys. I can't stand them," Chloe declared passionately, and to confirm her words, kissed Jake. "You're just incredible," he said, gently lifting Chloe's face by the chin and looking into her eyes. Jake also told her about himself. It turned out he lived in a small regional town, and he happened to be in Zelenogorsk the day Chloe sprawled on the food court floor. He was there on business, arranging some documents for his business. He and a friend were opening a car repair shop, trying to earn some money somehow, because there was no decent work for young guys in their town, and none was expected. So he had to travel from afar to see Chloe. The more the girl cherished the time spent with Jake. Unlike Chloe, the guy was born into a very poor family, and a single-parent one at that. Jake never knew his father. His mother raised him and his sister alone, working 2 shifts at a factory to feed her children, and they grew up like weeds, left to themselves. Jake's childhood was somewhat similar to Chloe's father's childhood. He also hung around day and night with the neighborhood boys, and what adventures he had. Sometimes fun, sometimes very dangerous. Chloe listened to these stories, holding her breath. At such moments, she regretted more and more that a normal childhood had passed her by. "I finished 9 grades and ran away from school. It wasn't for me," Jake said about himself. "I went to an automotive technical college. Cars always attracted me, and I was good with them. We were always hanging around in the neighbors' garages with the guys, helping men fix their cars. That's how we learned a lot. And then the army." In the army, Jake signed a contract. He needed money. His mother earned pennies, and his sister had a baby from God knows who and was hanging around on their parents' neck with the child. Jake understood that the family needed help, and as a man, he decided to provide it. True, the money came to the guy with great difficulty and at risk to his life. Jake had to spend several years in one of the so-called hotspots. He didn't tell Chloe the details, but she understood. Her beloved had encountered something very terrible there, something the guy desperately wanted to forget. His eyes, when he mentioned that period, became somehow frozen and cold. Alien. Jake himself immediately became more mature and distant. Something had happened to him there, something very bad. Chloe hugged Jake, stroking him soothingly. He quickly recovered, a smile again illuminating his face, which was so dear and pleasant to her. "Anyway, as soon as the contract ended, I quit. I realized that a military career wasn't for me. The money I earned was enough to buy a small apartment on the outskirts of the town, and there was still some left for starting a business. True, I had to take out a loan, but that's okay. Our car repair shop is already starting to make a profit. Small for now, but still." Chloe understood that Mark, Jake's business partner and longtime friend, worked for the police. The guys had served together, survived that same hotspot together, and this turned out to be very useful. After all, in a small town, fledgling businessmen have many competitors. Not everyone calmly accepted the news that new players had appeared in a long-divided market. Having their own people in the police was a real salvation for the budding businessmen. Jake's life was full of dangers, struggle, adventures. It was simply bubbling. Whereas Chloe's existence resembled a pond with stagnant water. True, now that Jake had appeared, Chloe's life had become much more interesting and pleasant. These secret meetings of theirs, just like in the movies. But the girl desperately wanted to be with Jake always, not to part. He wanted it too, which he told Chloe almost every time they met. At night before sleep, the girl imagined what their life together could be like, and the pictures were the most wonderful. But summer would soon end. She would be sent to Moscow State University. Then it meant her relationship with Jake would end? No, Chloe couldn't allow that. Even the thought of no longer having these wonderful dates made her feel sick. The gray, boring, meaningless life would start again. This was after Chloe had finally learned what it was like to be happy. With Jake, the girl felt completely safe, as if behind a stone wall. He always knew where to go, what to say, and what to do. The guy made decisions easily and without the slightest doubt. People often called him, asking for advice and help, and Jake never refused anyone. In his usual firm manner, he would offer a solution or promise to think about how to help the caller. Chloe liked Jake's popularity. That's what he was like. Everyone needed him. What a wonderful person her boyfriend was. He knew everything, could do anything. Confident, decisive, strong, experienced. Look how much this young man already had behind him. He endured, didn't break, was hardened. With someone like him, nothing was scary. Jake often suggested that Chloe introduce him to her parents. Really? Are we going to sneak around like little kids on dates? I want everything to be proper as it should be. But I even like it. Chloe smiled. She was only being playful out of happiness. Of course, it would be great to date Jake openly, but secret dates, that was a real adventure. And besides, the girl knew perfectly well that her parents wouldn't approve of her choice. They might even lock her up at home or force the security guard to escort their daughter right to the yoga studio, and then she wouldn't have a chance to meet Jake. I want to take you to my town. I want to fall asleep and wake up next to you. I just dream about it, Jake said, squeezing Chloe's hands tightly. I don't have enough of you, you understand? These sincere words and confessions made the girl's head spin. She had never felt so desired, beautiful, attractive. These feelings filled her with inner warmth, made the girl happier. Jake. He had somehow imperceptibly become the most important person to her. To be with him, Chloe was ready for anything. That's why the girl came up with the idea of an excursion, supposedly organized for her now former class, a 2-day trip to St. Petersburg. Her father approved the idea, gave his daughter money, and told her which places were worth visiting in St. Petersburg. The security guard took Chloe to the train station and put her on the train. Chloe even bought a ticket so as not to arouse unnecessary suspicion, but once she was in the carriage, the girl simply ran to another door and got out on the opposite side. She jumped off the step right into Jake's arms, who of course was aware of the girl's plans and was already waiting for her at the agreed location. That was the first time Chloe had been to Jake's town, a small, dusty, cramped town, somehow uncomfortable. But what did it matter? The main thing was that he was there, and they had 3 whole days to spend together, alone, just the two of them. What a wonderful time it was. Jake and Chloe were in no hurry. They had plenty of time at their disposal. Jake's apartment turned out to be exactly as Chloe had imagined it. Small, but new, with good renovations. There was clearly a lack of furniture, and this gave the place a special charm. It turned out that Jake was a wonderful cook. Chloe even felt awkward about it. She herself didn't even make sandwiches at home, because they had a professional cook for that purpose. Jake quickly taught the girl how to cook simple dishes: scrambled eggs, soup, pasta with meatballs. The girl herself asked him to. It turned out that it wasn't so difficult and was even pleasant, especially when cooking for a loved one. "You're a talented student," Jake praised, chewing her slightly overcooked meatballs diligently. "Very tasty." Jake introduced Chloe to his friend, the same Mark who worked for the police. Incidentally, the girl learned that they had once served together. That is, Mark had gone through the same hell as Jake, and he also had no desire to remember that period of his life. The friends had plenty of other things to talk about anyway. They endlessly discussed their car repair shop, which was just starting to get off the ground, made plans, argued about something. Chloe realized that Jake and Mark were very passionate about this business, and it also turned out that they lacked money for development. She herself offered Jake help. "I heard what you and Mark were talking about. You need money. I have it. My father transfers money to my card every week. I don't spend that much, so I opened an account a long time ago. A decent amount has accumulated there, and I can give you this money." "What are you saying?" Jake protested. "How would that look? How would I feel after that? What's wrong with that?" Chloe didn't understand. "You're my beloved. You do so much for me. I want to help you, too." In the end, Chloe convinced Jake. He, clearly embarrassed by this turn of events, accepted her help. The 3 days spent with her beloved flew by very quickly. It was time to return. Chloe cried, hugging Jake before getting out of his car. The train from St. Petersburg was arriving soon on the nearest tracks. Chloe already saw her security guard. He had come to meet the owner's daughter and take her home. And at home, she would have to wait to see Jake again and call him secretly. How hard that would be after the weekend spent together. Then everything changed somehow. Jake started calling less often. The guy now replied to Chloe's messages with monosyllables. There were no more endless compliments and admiration for the girl. Chloe even became worried. What if she had disappointed Jake during their sweet weekend, and that's why he was suddenly distant? The girl went over the events of the recent days in her memory, but found nothing that could cause doubt. Jake had looked very loving and happy, so what was the matter? Not wanting to suffer in uncertainty, Chloe asked Jake directly. He replied that he had temporary problems, a lot of things that required all his attention. The guy assured her that he loved Chloe very much, that she was the dearest person to him. It was just a difficult period right now. Maybe you need help? If it's about money, then... No, Jake snapped and seemed even offended that Chloe was offering him money again, but then he admitted that support wouldn't hurt him right now. Chloe happily transferred the guy an amount even larger than he had mentioned. He assured her that he would definitely return everything. And Chloe? It didn't matter to her. The girl just wanted everything to go back to how it was. Their meetings had completely dwindled. Now he didn't have time to come to her in the neighboring town. His business took up all his time and attention. Chloe understood that they just had to wait out the difficult times, but she missed Jake so desperately that she couldn't help herself. A month flew by unnoticed. It was time to go to Moscow. Chloe knew this moment would come, but she still felt as if fate itself had kicked her in the gut. The day before she left, Jake came to see her. The girl asked her parents for permission, made up a story about needing to go to the nearest store. They didn't send the security guard with her. They knew how painfully their daughter reacted to his presence. And here it was supposedly very close. Nothing would happen. Chloe slid into Jake's car, clung to him, and cried. I don't want to leave you, she confessed. Me neither. Jake stroked her back and hair. It was so peaceful next to him, so good. Was he really going to be so far away that even rare meetings would become impossible? You'll come to me there, won't you? Chloe asked. I'll try, baby. But you know I can't leave the business for long, especially now when everything is just starting. It's the busiest time. I want to spend every second of my time with you so much. I want that too. But you understand, don't you? I'm working for us now, so that one day I can come to your father and ask for your hand. But not as a poor guy, but as a successful businessman. Do you feel the difference? Yes, Chloe nodded. Jake was right, 100% right. Only for Chloe herself, it didn't matter who he was, a poor guy or a successful businessman. The main thing was to be with this person, see his eyes, hear his voice, feel his scent. Life in the capital didn't differ much from life in Zelenogorsk, except that her parents weren't there anymore. But the security guard still followed the girl, literally step by step, and at home, she was looked after by a housekeeper. She couldn't even invite friends over for a student party in the apartment. It wasn't strictly forbidden, but... True, Chloe wasn't even thinking about parties and entertainment. Firstly, she had to study a lot. Moscow State University was completely different from school. Secondly, Chloe missed Jake terribly, couldn't think of anything but his blue eyes and strong hands. They hardly communicated during this period, exchanging news, of course, but without much detail. The girl missed him very much. And thirdly, Chloe wasn't feeling well. She had no strength to get up in the mornings due to unexplained nausea. Her appetite was completely gone. The girl had to force herself to eat at least a little of the food the housekeeper prepared. Her formerly favorite dishes now caused disgust. One morning, after coping with another bout of nausea, Chloe thought. A realization suddenly struck her. That same day, she went into a pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test. Chloe didn't wait until she got home. She used it right in the university restroom. 2 lines. The girl looked at the test and smiled, and at the same time, she cried. Everything at once, simultaneously. She couldn't believe her happiness. Yes, there would be many difficulties. Chloe couldn't even imagine how she would explain things to her parents. But that wasn't the main thing. All that mattered was that a baby was already living under her heart, her and Jake's child. It was simply a miracle, magic. From the same restroom stall, Chloe called her beloved. As soon as she said hello, she told the guy the news. Silence hung on the other end. Apparently, Jake was trying to process what he had heard. The guy clearly hadn't expected such a turn of events. A few seconds of silence seemed like an eternity to Chloe. She suddenly realized that the news might not have pleased Jake at all. A minute ago, the girl had no doubt about the guy's reaction. She thought he would definitely receive the news with the same joy as she did, but Jake was silent. Is that for sure? He finally said. For sure. The test confirmed it, and I knew it even without it. That's incredible, Jake exhaled. That's very happy news, although unexpected. We need to urgently think about what to do next. Chloe smiled. A weight was lifted from her heart. Jake hadn't disappointed her expectations, and he would definitely figure something out. And Jake did figure something out. He came to her in Moscow one day completely unexpectedly, without even warning her. He somehow managed to find Chloe at the university. You're here. Chloe happily hung around his neck. Yes, Jake nodded. Where else would I be at a moment like this? The guy declared that it was time to talk to Chloe's parents. He insisted that she call her father right there and tell him everything, because now they needed to legalize their relationship, and besides, so many changes were coming. Chloe didn't want to do it, but Jake was firm, and she told her father everything. He listened without interrupting and then announced that he would come for his daughter immediately to take her home. You don't understand. I don't want to go home. We'll live with Jake. We're a real family now. But her father didn't want to listen to anything. It turned out that he knew about his daughter's meetings with Jake, hadn't interfered, knowing Chloe's reaction to parental lectures, but had investigated the guy. He's a bad person, her father shouted right into the phone. He's very dangerous. Don't stay alone with him. I knew you were sneaking out to meet him, but forbidding it was useless. You were being watched so that nothing terrible would happen. I hoped that a new life in Moscow would sweep you up, and you would forget him. You knew about him? Yes, I knew. And I know more than you do about him. Are you aware that he was involved in... Jake snatched the phone from Chloe's hand and hung up. Fury flashed in his eyes. Chloe had never seen her beloved like this. But yes, he could be understood after all. He had heard every word of her father, and he was saying hurtful, even insulting things. Well, it's time to make a choice, Jake said sternly. Your parents don't accept me and won't. That's obvious. No, Chloe objected. That's not true. They just don't know what you're like. And when they do... It is true, Jake countered. The choice here is either them or me and our child. Chloe thought. She remembered her father, her mother, her luxurious house, resembling a golden cage. It would be hard, of course, without her parents' support, but she was, after all, an adult and had the right to make her own decisions. And they, her father and mother, were still telling her what to do and treating her like a little girl. It was unbearable anymore. Of course you. Chloe went up to Jake and put her arms around his neck. At her words, he softened a little, even smiled slightly. Excellent. We're leaving for my place today. What about university? Chloe clarified. What university now? Jake put his arms around the girl's shoulders. You're expecting a baby. You don't need stress. You can't get tired. Chloe almost cried then. He was taking care of her so touchingly. That same day, the girl went to the dean's office and withdrew her documents. That was it. She was free now. Chloe moved in with Jake. When she picked up her things from home, she had to face pressure from her parents, but the girl was ready for it. Her mother cried. Her father alternately cajoled her, frightening her with a difficult future, and threatened her. But Chloe didn't give in. Jake had warned her that her parents would try to dissuade her. People as wealthy as your mother and father, they consider guys like me beggars, gold diggers. How right Jake turned out to be. Those were exactly the words her father used to call his daughter's future husband. It was unpleasant for Chloe to hear these insults. She felt something akin to disgust towards her parents. How could they? Chloe, trying to speak calmly, argued with her mother and father that she was already an adult. She was 18, a legal adult. Go, her father, exhausted by the end of the difficult conversation, finally uttered, Of course, I'm not tying you down. But know this, when you understand what kind of person this Jake of yours is, come back any time, in any condition. We will always take you in. Chloe nodded and quickly slipped out of the house, full of confidence that she was leaving for a happy life with her beloved, and very soon with a child. Her parents, they would understand in time that they were wrong. Jake was waiting for her at the gate in his old car. Seeing his beloved, the guy jumped out to meet her, hugged her, and took the heavy bag from her hands. "Hey, you!" Her father, who was watching the whole scene from the balcony, shouted. "If you hurt her, you'll be in big trouble." Chloe noticed Jake's eyes flash with rage, but the guy restrained himself, silently put Chloe in the car, then got in himself and started the engine. The girl saw that Jake wanted to leave this place as quickly as possible. She wanted the same thing. And family life began. True, the lovers never registered their marriage. At first, Jake wanted to save money for a beautiful wedding, then Chloe's belly became noticeable, and the guy decided to postpone the happy event until after the birth, so that Chloe would be beautiful and slim at her own wedding. At first, the girl enjoyed her beloved's closeness. She liked falling asleep and waking up next to him, making him breakfast, waiting for Jake to come home from work. The guy took care of her, bought fruit, constantly asked about her well-being, and even accompanied her to regular doctor's appointments. Chloe felt happy and loved. Jake was by her side, and soon their daughter would be born. How touchingly the future father behaved at the ultrasound. He almost cried from the overflow of emotions when they were told they would have a daughter, and they even showed her on the screen. But time passed, and Jake's behavior began to change. At first subtly, and then more and more strongly. Fault-finding. It all started with that. Jake, first jokingly, and then more and more seriously and irritably, reproached young Chloe for being a bad housekeeper. But where and when could she have become an exemplary housewife, when they always had helpers at home who took care of all the household chores? Chloe knew how to cook something, by the way. Jake had taught her that. Periodically, she wiped dust and put clothes in the washing machine. Jake, however, demanded more. He was not satisfied with dirty floors, things scattered everywhere, a refrigerator smeared with grease. He called Chloe messy, incompetent, dirty, sighed, and started cleaning everything himself. Chloe felt sorry for Jake at these moments and felt shame. Burning shame. He was a virtuoso at instilling guilt. Jake was simply a master at it. Later, it turned out that Jake abused alcohol. He might drink at home after work or come home already tipsy, explaining his condition by another friend's or colleague's birthday. Sometimes groups gathered at their place. Almost always Mark, the same friend and business partner, would come at such times. Chloe didn't like him. He was somehow fake, selfish, unpleasant. And Mark looked at her in a way that was unambiguous, and even allowed himself crude jokes about her. Jake didn't react. This was very hurtful. Jake looked at his friend as if he were an idol. Apparently, when they served together, Mark had almost saved his life, which was why they had such a relationship. Jake went to work every day, always at different times, sometimes in the morning, sometimes closer to noon. He worked at the local factory and simultaneously developed his business. There was a desperate lack of money. Fortunately, Chloe had brought many valuable things from home: jewelry, branded clothes. All of this was gradually being sold off because Jake needed money for his business, and sometimes there wasn't even enough for basic food. The car repair shop wasn't bringing in money yet. Jake explained this as the initial stage of development, saying it was always like that. But one day, Chloe began to suspect that this car repair shop didn't exist. Her suspicions were unintentionally confirmed by Mark, who burst out laughing when Chloe mentioned that her husband was a real businessman. True, the man quickly composed himself, put on a serious face, but Chloe had already understood everything. At that time, she still thought that Jake was lying, only to appear more worthy in her eyes. Chloe pushed away the memories of giving him money for a business that, it seemed, didn't exist and never had. Chloe didn't communicate with her parents. Jake didn't explicitly forbid it, but the girl understood that it would be unpleasant for him and didn't want to unnecessarily anger and upset her beloved. Yes, at that time, he was still beloved. Despite the fact that the guy already allowed himself to insult Chloe, the girl, for some reason, she sincerely considered them deserved. One day, Chloe clearly realized that she was unhappy with Jake. He had become distant, a stranger. Now the guy did nothing but find fault with Chloe and demand complete obedience and household achievements from her. At the same time, they were desperately short of money, not just for clothes or things for the baby who was about to be born, but even for basic groceries. Jake earned almost nothing. They lived on the money from selling Chloe's things. But these funds were also running out. Only a couple of rings, a chain, and a brooch were left in the jewelry box. The rest had long been in the pawn shop. Chloe realized she had made a mistake, but how could she go back to her parents after that conversation? She would have to admit they were right and portray herself as a foolish, lost girl. And Chloe felt ashamed in front of her mother and father, so the girl stayed with Jake, hoping for the best and trying to meet his expectations. And then Jake hit her for the first time. It happened the day the girl didn't have enough money for the expensive pills prescribed at the prenatal clinic. Where am I supposed to find that kind of money? I'm not a millionaire. Ask your daddy. After all, this child is his granddaughter. My daddy? Chloe repeated. Maybe I should go live with my daddy then? What kind of husband are you needed for anyway? Before she even finished the sentence, Chloe realized she shouldn't have said it. Jake's face flushed, his eyes widened, his gaze became furious, angry, very frightening. So that's what you think of me? He shouted, sweeping the plates off the table. You're no better than your parents. You consider those poorer than you second-class people. Then came undeserved insults, foul language, strong words and expressions that Chloe had never heard before. She stood stunned by Jake's rage and didn't recognize him. Had she ever loved this terrible man? He slapped her across the face, so hard that Chloe couldn't stay on her feet. Luckily, there was a sofa nearby and the girl slid right onto it. Her cheek was burning, tears streamed from her eyes. Jake froze for a moment, perhaps not expecting this from himself. Then he cursed and went into the other room, slamming the door loudly. A few minutes later, he rushed out of the house without saying a word to Chloe. He came back in the morning, drunk and no longer aggressive. This happened again and again. Physical abuse became commonplace. It seemed that having allowed himself to treat the girl this way once, Jake could no longer stop. Chloe regularly received slaps and shoves for dishes not put away on time, a burnt pie, or asking too many questions. One day, the girl threatened that if Jake didn't stop, she would report him to the police. The guy laughed unpleasantly. Go ahead, he smirked. Did you forget where Mark works? He's risen to a high enough rank. He has his people everywhere. What do you think will happen to your police report? Jake was clearly not to be intimidated. Of course, one day Chloe's patience snapped, and she decided to leave anyway. Only Jake didn't let her go. Seeing the girl's packed bags, he took her key and stood in front of the door. Jake begged, asked for forgiveness, promised to be the most loving and caring husband, called himself terrible names, assured her that everything would be fine now, and Chloe faltered, threw herself into his arms, clung to him. At that moment, she was sure that the worst and most unpleasant things were behind them. But nothing changed in Jake's behavior. Reproaches, fault-finding, physical abuse, drinking, it all continued. Chloe packed her things again. This time, Jake didn't apologize. He just roughly pushed her away from the door, took the girl's phone and key. Chloe sobbed, begging him to let her go. Why do you need me if you don't love me? Let me leave. You're carrying my child right now, Jake explained. Once you give birth, leave the daughter with me and go wherever you want. I can't let my daughter grow up without a father. I grew up without a father. It's hard. Very hard. That's when Chloe first thought that Jake might not be entirely mentally healthy. A little later, the girl became completely convinced of this. Chloe once tried to escape at night while Jake was sleeping. During the day, in his absence, it was impossible. He now locked her in and took the key with him. It wasn't like she could go out the window. It was the 5th floor, after all. Chloe had just crept into the hallway, quietly turned the key in the lock. He woke up. He rushed out of the bedroom, pushed the girl away from the door. She lost her balance, fell right onto the floor, hitting her shoulder painfully. Jake then just lost control. He screamed through things, and then handcuffed Chloe right to the radiator. Where he got the handcuffs, Chloe didn't know. Most likely Mark gave them to him. He was a police officer after all. Since then, Chloe's life turned into hell. During the day, she sat chained to the radiator in the corner of the living room, away from the window, so she couldn't call for help. In the evening, Jake would come, feed her, but wouldn't answer her questions, wouldn't pay attention to Chloe's pleas and requests for forgiveness. He ignored her, punishing her with silence, indifference, detachment, as if Chloe were nothing. Sometimes the girl thought, what if Jake just didn't come one day? She would then have to starve to death next to that radiator. Fear washed over the girl in waves. Jake was not normal. Her father had been right after all. Although most likely even he didn't understand how sick Jake was. Otherwise, he would have held on to his daughter no matter what. He was a terrible, dangerous person who had no control over his actions, and she had become his victim. Now the guy's apartment, where Chloe had once been so happy, had become her prison. One day, The girl, not particularly hoping for an answer, dared to ask Jake a question that worried her. What happens next? I'm going into labor soon. Will I give birth in handcuffs too? Yes, he simply replied. What's the big deal? I've watched a lot of videos about it. It's a disgusting process, of course, but there's nothing difficult about it. Nature will take care of everything. Will I give birth here, apparently? Chloe was horrified by the plans of the man she had once loved. Yes, Jake nodded. Afterward, I'll take the child and you'll be free. Be patient, it won't be long now. Chloe went cold. Jake wasn't joking or trying to scare her. He really intended to do exactly that. This man was crazy. How had she not noticed it before? Chloe understood perfectly well that such a home birth without medical help could end tragically for her and the baby. Or, most likely, for both of them. She had to act, and quickly. She couldn't sit idly by anymore. One day, a convenient opportunity presented itself to Chloe. Jake's friends came over, the same Mark, an unpleasant and dangerous type, possibly as abnormal as his best friend and some older man. They settled in the kitchen, talking, drinking, smoking right at the table. In short, they were having a good time. Of course, the unfamiliar guest asked why Mark kept his wife chained to the radiator. He lied about her diagnosis, saying that during pregnancy, a condition had worsened, making Chloe dangerous to herself and the child. So measures had to be taken. Jake spoke convincingly, as always, and Mark echoed him. The guests even expressed sympathy for Jake. The evening went on. Chloe waited for the right moment, and finally fate took pity on her. The unfamiliar guest himself approached Chloe, squatted down in front of her with a pitiable face. Oh, so young, and such misfortune. But you have to. Jake and Mark were already drunk. The stranger was also barely standing. Please give me the key. It's in Jake's jacket pocket, Chloe asked. Why? The man became wary. She blinked her cloudy eyes sleepily. I need to go to the toilet. It's okay. Jake always lets me go. Yes. The man tried to figure something out. Why don't you ask him? You see, he always gets very upset when I ask him for help. It's an unnecessary reminder of my condition. I don't want to spoil his mood right now. Chloe said the first thing that came to her mind. She didn't particularly count on success, but it worked. The guest went to the hallway where the outerwear was hanging, found the key, and unlocked the handcuffs. Chloe, where did she get the strength? She rushed into the hallway, grabbed the first coat she could find from the hanger, it turned out to be Mark's raincoat, and dashed out through the unlocked front door to freedom. Chloe knew she had to hurry. The man must have already told Jake what had happened. He, of course, would be furious. It was terrifying to imagine what he would do to her if he found her. The girl flew out into the black November night. It was late, but the buses were still running. Chloe ran, not seeing the road. She found some change in the coat pocket. This came in very handy because the icy wind and rain soon made themselves felt. The girl was frozen to the bone. She jumped into the first bus that came to the stop. It was warm and even cozy inside. The girl settled on the back seat and thought, what to do next? No money, no phone. She couldn't go to the police. Jake had said many times that Mark, and therefore he himself, had everything covered there. The old bus wound through the night streets. There were few cars on the roads now, so Chloe immediately noticed it. Jake's car, painfully familiar. It was slowly rolling in the right lane, so they were already looking for her. Had Jake gotten behind the wheel? He could barely stand. Chloe sank lower than the window level, almost lying on the seat, which caused confusion in the conductor who was watching the only passenger. Do you need help? The woman in the orange vest with lots of pockets asked her. Maybe. Just tell her everything? No, she couldn't. She would think Chloe was crazy or call the police. And at the police station. In short, she couldn't go to the police, absolutely couldn't. I'm fine. Chloe shook her head. She got off at the final stop simply because the bus didn't go any further. Finding herself at a deserted stop on the outskirts of the town, the girl shivered. Now what? She couldn't go back into the town. They were already looking for her. She had to go somewhere, maybe in the direction of her hometown, or hitchhike along the side of the highway. Someone would give her a ride. After all, the route to Zelenogorsk was popular, busy. It was a dangerous decision, Chloe knew, but the girl had no other choice anyway. Going back to the town was definitely not an option. They would find her quickly there. And I just walked forward, Chloe said with bitterness in her voice. Sometimes I thought it was them driving down the road. Then I would hide behind bushes or trees. But each time it was someone else. I asked for help, but everyone just drove past. And then you picked me up. That's all. David sat for a while as if stunned by the girl's story. Could all this be true? Or maybe Chloe was really not normal, maybe even dangerous. Although it didn't seem like it. Her speech was clear, coherent, her gaze clear. The man's decision was made in a flash. He simply couldn't do otherwise. We're going to Zelenogorsk, he said, to your parents. Really? You'll take me? Of course I will. What else can I do? A girl in your condition, pregnant, without money, without support. By all accounts, someone is looking for her. Leave her on the highway, abandon her to her fate? David couldn't do that. Of course, he would lose orders and spend a decent amount on gas, not to mention the time. He wouldn't get enough sleep before work again, might even oversleep, be late, and get chewed out. But all that was trivial compared to this girl's problems. On the way to Zelenogorsk, Chloe relaxed a little. She leaned back in the seat and dozed off. David looked at her with a smile. That was good. The girl needed to sleep. She had been through too many trials. Closer to her hometown, recognizing the familiar landscapes, Chloe suddenly perked up, became livelier, and started asking David about his life. He answered honestly, frankly, in detail. The girl lamented, felt sorry for Sam and his parents. It was clear that she sincerely cared about David and his family. It was already early morning when David, pulling up to a large house surrounded by a high fence, turned off the engine. Can it be? Have I made it? Tears welled up in Chloe's eyes from the overflow of emotion. Shall I walk you in? The man asked. Thank you. You've done so much for me. I'll go myself. But you wait. My father will surely want to talk to you. The girl slipped out of the car and pressed the doorbell button at the gate. A minute later, the doors opened and Chloe disappeared behind the fence. Interesting. What was happening in there now? Her parents probably couldn't believe their happiness. Their daughter had returned. David sincerely hoped that Jake and his friend Mark would be dealt with. Well, if Chloe was to be believed, her father was an influential man. He wouldn't let this go unpunished. David's eyes were heavy. He was uncontrollably sleepy. He probably wouldn't get any sleep today. He would have to spend the whole day on coffee and then go straight to sleep after work. There was no question of going out to drive a taxi tomorrow. At that moment, his phone rang. David glanced at the screen. His wife. Strange at this hour. Something was clearly wrong. Where have you been? Sarah's anxious voice came through the receiver. Come home quickly. Sam is unwell. We're leaving in an ambulance right now. The girls are home alone. What's wrong with him? As always, a tantrum started and I couldn't stop it. Hurry home. David started the engine. Even at high speed, it would take him at least an hour to get there. Chloe's story immediately flew out of his head. The man didn't even remember that the girl had asked him to wait to meet her father. David had more pressing concerns now. When the man pulled up to the house, it was already getting light. Annie and Laura were sitting on the sofa in the living room, hugging each other, so scared, so worried. Very sweet, touching in their pink pajamas. David picked up his daughters, carried them to the bedroom, tucked them in, and sat beside their bunk bed until the girls fell asleep. Sam. He was having another relapse. They urgently needed money for the guy's rehabilitation. Otherwise, what would happen? Otherwise, it was difficult to predict, but certainly nothing good awaited them. Sarah returned an hour or an hour and a half later. She found her husband asleep right on the floor, next to the girl's bed. She sighed, didn't wake him, just covered her husband with a blanket and went to the bedroom. Sam was kept in the hospital for a week, and they were warned that without treatment and rehabilitation, serious deterioration awaited him. Life went on. Sam was in the hospital. David worked day and night, trying to raise the necessary sum for treatment. Sarah knocked on the doors of foundations, but there were few chances there. First and foremost, money was collected for the treatment of children who needed urgent surgery. Children like Sam were not a priority. David hardly remembered the story that had happened to him the other day. He had too much worry and trouble suddenly piled on him. One morning, his boss called David into his office. The man went there, full of the gloomiest premonitions. They would start scolding him for being late again. David was indeed often late for work, not getting enough sleep after night shifts, But David realized he was wrong in his assumptions as soon as he saw Chloe in the boss's office. She looked completely different than she had on that foul November night. Rested, refreshed, stylishly dressed, a real beauty. A man sat next to her, strong, tall, with an attentive, sharp gaze. It was immediately clear that they were father and daughter. They resembled each other too much. "Well, you two talk, you need to catch up, and I have things to do." The boss smiled and left the office. The man stood up from his seat, approached David, and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you. You saved my daughter." Sincere gratitude was visible in this man's eyes. "My daughter is the most precious thing I have." "But I just gave her a ride," David replied. "Your daughter is great. She saved herself." "She wouldn't have saved herself if it weren't for you." Chloe joined the conversation. She also came up to David, hugged him. "I was stopping cars on the highway then. They saw me, but they drove past. No one wanted extra problems. But you saved me. You yourself needed saving, didn't you? My daughter told me about your difficult situation." "And what happened next?" David asked. "What about Jake? Did they find him?" "Of course," Chloe's father nodded. "Immediately, that same night, or rather, in the morning. That scoundrel will get what he deserves. He's a cruel man, and his friend Mark won't help him in his situation either. Jake had a difficult childhood. His stepfather abused him. There was no one to protect the boy. Then he ended up in a hot spot, saw terrible things there. That's why he went off the rails. At first, he planned to be with Chloe for the money, to gradually extract funds from me through her. But you see how it turned out? My daughter broke off all ties with us. The plan failed, and Jake decided to act differently, to demand a ransom from us for her. At least that's how he explained his behavior to the police. Jake intimidated Chloe, treated her horribly. He's a terrible man with a broken psyche, and that's the kind of monster Chloe fell into the hands of." The girl listened to her father sadly, with downcast eyes. It was clear that she hadn't fully recovered from what had happened to her, and would she ever? "We want to help your son," Chloe suddenly addressed David directly. "Sam?" "Yes." Her father brightened up. "We learned about the boy's diagnosis and condition. I contacted doctors from St. Petersburg. They are already waiting for the child at the rehabilitation center, along with the family. Your hotel is paid for all of you. Sam will be treated, and you can walk around St. Petersburg for a while, get acquainted with the northern capital. There's a lot of interesting things there for your daughters, and the doctors at this center are the best specialists. They pull through patients even worse than your Sam." I need to talk to my wife." David still couldn't believe what he was hearing. Had the problem really been solved? "She knows everything." Chloe's father smiled. "We've already talked. She's packing the suitcases. Your wife wasn't just happy that Sam will be treated," Chloe added. "Sarah?" Sarah smiled and said that her husband is the kindest, noblest person in the world. She's happy about that. David felt a warmth spread through his soul. The world around him immediately seemed brighter, lighter.